You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 11th of February 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. Coming up on today's programme.
If all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out.
US President Donald Trump threatens dramatic but unspecified consequences if Hamas delays hostage releases. Also ahead, Romanian President Klaus Iohannis decides to step down rather than face impeachment by Parliament. Later in the show, we'll wrap up the latest business news and check in with our team at the World Government Summit in Dubai. And
it doesn't have to be completely successful, but if there is some data that suggests, for example, less number of young people on social media, I think that there will be more countries that will follow suit.
Singapore joins the list of countries concerned that its youngsters are spending too much time gawping into screens. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And welcome to today's edition of The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. Hamas has said it is postponing its next release of Israeli hostages, which was due to occur this Saturday, in exchange for, as on previous such occasions, Palestinians currently in Israeli jails. Hamas's line is that Israel is not complying with its obligations under the current ceasefire agreement, with specific reference to permitting humanitarian aid to enter the Gaza Strip and Palestinians displaced from the north of the Strip to return to whatever might remain of their homes. I'm joined with more by Monocle's Middle East correspondent, Layla Milana Allen. Layla, obviously it's still difficult to get independently verified facts out of Gaza due to the ongoing refusal to admit independent media, but as we are able to understand it, does Hamas have a case here vis-à-vis Israel's obligations under the ceasefire agreement?
Hamas absolutely has a case. It's very clear that Israel has committed multiple violations of the ceasefire. Among those are the aid issues. So thus far, since the ceasefire began, only just over half of the number of aid trucks that were supposed to be allowed in have been allowed in. That is a shortfall of nearly 4,000 trucks. Fuel trucks, the same issue, about the same number they're allowing in. They promised that they would build tens of thousands of these mobile houses called caravans for Palestinians who are living in the middle of the Strip with no shelter. They have inexplicably not allowed any of those caravans in to be built from places like Qatar and Jordan that are trying to send them. They also haven't supplied any of the tents they were supposed to supply. So these are all major issues. But Israel is complying with quite a lot of the really important military things, like having pulled back. They're pulling back from the Sarim corridor, which is the central strip through Gaza. They have allowed some Gazans to return to North Gaza. One of the problems is that the IDF is attacking some Gazans who return to their homes in the north. Already 25 Palestinians have been killed just since the end of January. So it's a sort of 50-50 here. Hamas does have a point. On the other hand, the question is it really worth derailing the ceasefire for these issues, given that Gazans will suffer so much worse again if the war starts in full again?
Well, on that thought, if Hamas are not bluffing and if they do not release these hostages as scheduled on Saturday, do we have an idea of Israel's likely response?
So to be clear, they're not supposed to release all these hostages on Saturday. What's happened here is a kind of game of chicken, essentially, where there have been multiple issues with the hostage releases. So Israel was very angry on the second to last release of young women, that there was kind of this big parade with Hamas fighters, and they felt that the women were harassed and, terrified in this situation. It was very unsafe for them. And anyone kind of got to them as they were being handed over to the Red Cross. Then, and all the women who have returned have been in very good shape. They've been clearly very well looked after. And, supporters of not necessarily even Hamas, but people who say that Israel isn't treating the situation fairly have said, look, this is how you should be treating hostages. Look at the difference with how Palestinian prisoners who've been released emaciated and clearly tortured from prisons in return have been. On the other hand, the most recent release of male hostages by Hamas, 3 Israeli men. They were very clearly emaciated, very clearly had not been treated well. That had people up in arms. And so people started protesting in the streets of Tel Aviv, saying we must get all the hostages back. Now, because we're so worried about how the men in particular are being treated, those men who were released said one man who's about to turn 24 years old, he'll probably have his birthday while still being held as a hostage, was being starved and held underground, in handcuffs, chained, and that his health was in great danger. So essentially, this reaction has suddenly come that we're worried about the hostages. We're also worried that Hamas might pull out of the deal. So it's got to be Saturday. It's Saturday or nothing. Now, the problem with that is that's not the ceasefire deal. So what does Hamas gain from agreeing to release suddenly everyone on Saturday? The whole point was that it would be staggered week by week until we get to March. We always knew this would be very, very tough as the weeks went on, because the idea is that initially it's about a ceasefire and handing over hostages and prisoners, but we are getting to the point now where they have to discuss the future. And that was always going to be very tricky.
We did hear at the top of the show that clip from US President Donald Trump threatening that all hell would break loose if all the hostages were not released by midday on Saturday. He has, of course, had quite a lot to say about Gaza in recent days and weeks. In the region itself, in the Middle East, how seriously are those remarks being taken?
Look, I mean, the way you described it at the top of the show, is exactly what Donald Trump's sort of behavior over Middle East policy has been thus far in this term. Dramatic but non-specific. He sort of comes out and says something wild and then doesn't really follow it up with anything. A great example is a few days ago him saying that, he wanted the US to essentially buy Gaza and run Gaza, and he didn't really then follow it up with anything specific. Essentially, his attitude seems to be, I'm going to throw some wild ideas into the mix, and if you don't like it, find a better one. Some people think he's almost kind of trying to pressure Arab leaders to come up with a solution because he doesn't want his team to have to do it. The reality with this, I mean, it's not Netanyahu says. Netanyahu has been quite careful thus far about how he's reacted to these things. The defense minister of Israel Katz, has turned around and said, we need to get them all out now. The condition of our hostages means that we can't wait any longer. The reaction in the Middle East is, look, a lot of people in the Middle East really like Donald Trump. They feel that he is a man, who's a tough man who can be trusted to make the difficult decisions. A really good example is forcing this Gaza ceasefire through. It was his envoy, Steve Witkoff, who forced this ceasefire through just before Donald Trump came to power. It wasn't Biden, who had been meandering and not really willing to push Netanyahu on the issue. So they do feel actually that, he's potentially the right guy to actually force Israel into action. The issue is that whenever he seems to feel, particularly after Netanyahu's visit to the White House as the first foreign leader to visit the White House in Trump's new term the other day, he left feeling very happy and feeling completely supported by Donald Trump. So the question is whether he might do something so rash that it could sort of, as we all know, be against international law and hugely damaging to the lives of people in the Middle East. But actually, you'd be surprised on the streets. They seem happier with a man who at least is willing to say something and do something than the man they've seen in seat of power in America for the last 4 years, who said a lot of things but never did anything the way they see it.
Leila Milana Allen, thank you as always for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing. Here is Anita Ryota with the day's other headlines.
Thanks, Andrew. A Ukrainian drone attack damaged an industrial facility in Russia's Saratov region. The Russian Defense Ministry said air defenses intercepted and destroyed 40 Ukrainian drones overnight. This comes as part of Ukraine's wider strategy to weaken the country economically. Russia's aviation watchdog has suspended flights at 4 airports to ensure safety. South Sudan's president has dismissed 2 of the country's vice presidents along with the head of the National Security Service. The announcement came via presidential decree read on the South Sudan Broadcasting Corporation. South Sudan is one of the few countries with 5 vice presidents, a structure established under the 2018 peace agreement. No reason for the move was given. In South Korea, KG Mobility is looking to reclaim its leadership position in the pickup truck market with the launch of the Muso EV, an electric version of its iconic SUV. It will be equipped with a lithium iron phosphate battery from China's BYD. The vehicle will make its official debut in March this year. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Anita. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Romania's President, Klaus Iohannis, has announced that he will step down tomorrow. He had already overstayed his term, remaining as a placeholder following the annulment by Romania's top court of last year's presidential election, widely assumed to have been fiddled by Russia in favour of a hitherto little heralded pro-Putin nationalist, Călin Georgescu. A fresh election is due in May, but opposition MPs were not willing to wait and were seeking to impeach President Iohannis. He appears to be jumping before being pushed. Well, I'm joined with more on this by Bucharest-based journalist Alison Mutler, manager of the news site universal.net. Alison, given that he was going anyway in May, he did not, of course, stand in last year's presidential election being term limited. Why were opposition MPs so determined to oust him?
Opposition lawmakers, who are mainly nationalists, have painted Klaus Iohannis, the president for the last 10 years of Romania, as one of the sources of Romania's ills, and a globalist and an internationalist and a pro-EU and pro-NATO. And they stand what they call for a sovereign Romania with looser ties with NATO and EU. So he personified for them what was bad about current-day Romania. And also it was a victory for them to be able to remove him from office in this way. He was pushed, as you said.
What is their actual case, legally/constitutionally speaking? You can't impeach and remove a president just because you don't like him.
They could have voted in Parliament. They may have won in Parliament to impeach him, and then a referendum would have been held within 30 days. Now, that would mean Romania's attention would be directed at his impeachment. He himself said Romania is the laughingstock of the world because I am already the outgoing president. I'm leaving anyway in May. And I think he stepped down also to avoid aggravating this political crisis that Romania has been thrown into since Russian, as you said, Russian fiddling in the elections, or reports of Russian fiddling. And he stepped down to stop things getting any worse, and also being accused of clinging on to power until the last minute, which is what the nationalists like to say, that he was desperate for power. So he was just staying in office to enjoy a few perks of office until he actually had to leave.
I mean, on that thought, though, given the extraordinary circumstances, i.e. the actual annulment of a presidential election, did he have a reasonable choice? What would have happened if he'd said, well, I'm term limited, I quit as well? Would Romania just not have had a president for a few months?
No, what happens according to the Constitution, which is going to happen tomorrow when he formally steps down, is there's an interim president. So it's somebody who steps into the office, but they have limited powers, limited authority. And that has happened before in the last 35 years. But it's obviously a temporary position. It's somebody who's just sort of holding the driving wheel, but not really steering the car.
I mean, is it possible to say how public opinion has been tracking on this?
Public opinion at the moment is very heated. There's a lot of rhetoric out there. People are trying to find a scapegoat for what has been happening in Romania. People don't believe that Russia would fiddle. They think it must be something done from Romania on the inside. There are a lot of people going for the nationalist parties, and there aren't many cool heads in Romania at the moment, because you find both the nationalists and so-called reformists are actually on the same side. They're sort of their dissatisfaction is directed at the president and the government. So there's a lot of political and social turmoil at the moment, and not many cool heads.
We are not far out from that second attempt to conduct a presidential election. Do the polls tell us anything about who seems the likeliest winner?
Well, we don't formally know who will stand, because Călin Georgescu, the candidate who was the outsider who won the first round, it's not clear whether he will or will be able to stand. It's possible that the Constitutional Court will ban him from standing. It's possible himself he might not want to stand. We don't know. Who is running? It's basically a choice between nationalists and pro-Europeans, but even the pro-Europeans are taking on more of a nationalist line, because that seems to be what is popular in Romania at the moment.
And just finally, Alison, have we learnt anything conclusive about the alleged Russian fiddling in the previous presidential election?
We haven't. People like at my Universal, we know about how Russian disinformation works. We have been writing about it, but the general public don't really have much knowledge about how Russian disinformation and interference works. And there hasn't been any explanation either from the president or institutions about what it involved, except for in general terms. And that has also led to the ongoing political crisis, because people are asking, did Russia really meddle? If so, how did they do it? And there's a lack of public knowledge about how Russian interference would work.
And just as actually a final thought, obviously, even if Russia has meddled in Romania's election and or other people's elections, that doesn't get Russia anywhere unless there is some sympathy among the electorate in their favour that they can work with. And it does seem counterintuitive, but how much sort of vaguely pro-Russian, pro-Putinist sympathy is there in Romania, and why is it there?
There is in Romania, there is a certain nostalgia for the communist days, when things were clearer and there was less discrepancy between the rich and the poor. Romanians generally are not pro-Russians because Russia took over Romania after the Second World War. But there are things which are part of the Kremlin rhetoric which resonate with Romanians, a certain social conservatism about LGBT, about the church, about the family. And so Russia is very clever the way it does work in its on social media and influence, etc. That they promote certain narratives that resonate with Romanian. They never promote the Kremlin or Russia outright, because that wouldn't work. But there are themes like the Orthodox Church, like family, LGBT and so on, that do resonate with Romanians. And so that is what they play on. And also Ukraine, because Romania does have territories which are now part of a modern day Ukraine. So they play on certain, what I would call social and cultural themes, which are popular in Romania, or they've made them popular in Romania.
Alison Mutler in Bucharest, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing.
Tune in to Monocle on Culture, where we grill our panel of critics to get the inside line on the best in the world of film, music, art, literature and more.
It's just got this synth section that kind of makes you want to swing through the saloon doors straight to the dance floor.
With industry insiders and the odd bit of reportage too, it's bound to keep the most discerning of culture vultures very well fed.
Why'd You Come In Here Looking Like That is a song that is absolutely going to make you want to put on a pair of tight jeans and go boot scooting.
Monocle on Culture, premiering Mondays at 2000 London time and available thereafter wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio, and a contingent of Monocle Radio is in the United Arab Emirates, indeed, this week at the Dubai World Government Summit, along with more than 30 heads of state, delegations from 140 nations and representatives from more than 80 international organisations. And I'm joined now from Dubai by Monocle's head of radio, Tom Edwards. Tom, what is occurring?
Hello, Andrew. Well, yeah, what a delight to update you with what we've been doing here today. Let me set the scene first of all. We're in our Monocle Radio booth here at Madinat Jumeirah in Dubai. I can see the requisite palm trees, the blue sky, the sun. But in front of me, Andrew Miller, if you can believe it, more beautiful even than that vista is none other than Monocle's editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, who also joins me. And Andrew's been very busy. Andrew, this afternoon you were sort of marshalling various panels on all sorts of themes. Give us a quick rundown of what you've been doing and who you've been talking to.
Yes, Andrew. So I got to run a section of the afternoon which is looking at leadership, which is a thing we should all be thinking about, but especially how it's changing at this time as industries are upended, lots of people here really focused on the impact that AI is going to have. So I spoke first of all to Mohammed Kande, for example, who runs PwC, one of the biggest professional services companies in the world, just under 300,000 employees. And it was just good to kind of get a feel about, are people confident about what lies ahead? What are their nerves? Speaking to business leaders, to people running business schools, to educators. It was an amazing afternoon, although I was kind of glad when it was done. It was a bit nerve-wracking as well. A very large room of engaged people, though.
Hey, Andrew, to follow that up, I mean, the summit in general, how does it differ from other such wingdings which occur around the world? What is its, if you will, unique selling point?
Dubai, to be honest. Whatever you think about Dubai is a place where people from all around the world have moved because it's easy to set a company up here, low taxation, a country, can you believe it, that is based on immigration, where they welcome the best talent from around the world. If you've got an idea and you can make it work, they want you to try that here. So there's an incredible optimism in the air around these industries, whether that's delivering new healthcare, whether that's thinking of new models of mobility, but especially AI. They have a minister of AI. So all of these people, are coming from every corner of the world. The reason they come here because they know deals are done, conversations are had, that people are here to network in a kind of glorious way. It's not just transactional. There is an intellectual element to it, but it's a positive take on the world. And perhaps, I know, Andrew, you go to the Munich Security Conference. Mm-hmm. You go to we had a team at Davos. I don't think there's anywhere that they're going to be focusing on the conflicts of this world. They're trying to focus on the solutions and the potential.
And Tom, to bring you back in, throw ahead to the rest of the event. What does Monocle Radio have coming up?
Well, Andrew, we have had already, a roster of amazing guests, and actually, if people keep the dial tuned to Monocle Radio, they'll begin to hear from those on our programming in the coming days. And these are leaders, as Andrew said, from both public and private, from NGOs, not-for-profits. The whole range is here. And just to echo what Andrew said, I think one of the truly impressive things here is it's kind of a proof point for the benefits of multilateralism, and we're seeing so many people who are advocating for withdrawing from institutions, local, federal, international, but from your work on the foreign desk that there remains value in convening and getting into even some of these rather thorny issues. So when you can sort of see it and in our case hear it in action, it's quite impressive. And I think the thing I've enjoyed most is the appetite to tackle even the most vexing problems, judging by the people we've spoken to just so far today, is completely undiminished. If anything, with all the other negative rhetoric we're seeing from certain quarters, it seems to have encouraged people here to double down. So it's broadly encouraging, and yet there's no question, people are not shying away from asking the tough questions.
Tom Edwards and Andrew Tuck at the World Government Summit in Dubai. Thanks both for joining us, and as Tom was saying, there will be much more from our team there across all our programming in coming days. You're listening to The Briefing. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Time now to take a look at the latest business news. I'm joined by Ewan Potts at Bloomberg. Ewan, the European Union has had some time to consider a response to President Donald Trump's well-telegraphed tariffs on steel, aluminium, etc. What are we hearing from them?
Hello, Andrew. I want to start off with a rather startling fact. We are just 3 weeks into this presidency. I had to double check this earlier because I thought it must be more like 3 months, but actually Donald Trump has only been president for 3 weeks. And the flurry of announcements, blimey, it's been quite something, hasn't it? But when it comes to markets and business, really tariffs are the only story in town. Will he, won't he, and how much will they disrupt global trade? We heard just within the last 24 hours that Donald Trump plans to impose 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports into the United States from wherever they come from. Now, they're not due to come into place until next March. Whether they do come into place is another matter. We have seen that certainly on some tariffs, Donald Trump's bark is worse than his bite. And certainly when it comes to markets, it would be fair to say that investors are pretty much discounting this whole business. Markets have not been reacting massively to the tariff threats, but if they did come into place, they would be pretty significant. Now, we've heard a response from the European Commission today, President Ursula von der Leyen saying that she deeply regrets the US decision to impose the tariffs and that the EU will not take this lying down. It will trigger firm and proportionate countermeasures, to use the words from Brussels. Now, if you cast your mind back to the first Donald Trump presidency, you'll remember there was a similar spat over similar products, in fact, and the EU responded by putting levies on some iconic American products like Harley-Davidson motorbikes and bourbon whiskey. So it looks like this time the EU is also going to respond pretty firmly. Interesting to look at the UK's response. The UK is taking the nicely approach to Donald Trump, but they're hoping that the president will not levy tariffs on the UK. He's spoken slightly more warmly towards the UK. He clearly doesn't like the European Union. And Chancellor Rachel Reeves saying today that she strongly believes the deal can be done. She says she doesn't like tariffs and she doesn't want to see more tariffs. And the UK hoping that its better trade position, it does a particularly large deficit with, or rather the US doesn't run a large deficit with the UK. It's hoping that that will help in this relationship. So the UK trying to diverge a little bit from the EU. And also interesting to think how that will affect the relationship with Brussels, because the UK is hoping to move slightly closer to the EU when it comes to the trade relationship. So perhaps this may get in the way of that relationship. So loads of interesting things to consider when it comes to tariffs.
And Ewan, just quickly, another story developing, a change in thinking at BP.
Yeah, if you've been around for a while, Andrew, you'll remember when BP used to stand for British Petroleum. Well, they had a big rebrand, brought in that green logo and called themselves Beyond Petroleum. Now, of course, in between those two things, there was the disastrous oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of America, as we should probably call it now, the worst in US history. But I think this latest strategy revamp today, which is a big one from BP, perhaps it would be better to call them P, because they are moving beyond the beyond and they're ditching many of their investments in green energy. The idea was that they would move ahead of the pack in the transition to greener energy. They invested in all sorts of projects around the world beyond petroleum, but they're starting to dial back on that strategy because it's widely been seen by investors as having been a failure. They weren't, of course, the only oil and gas company to move into green investments, but they were really at the forefront of it, and they were going further and faster than other companies. And now they're dialing back on that. The returns have not been that good, and the company is going to double down on oil and gas exploitation. Probably not good news for the planet, but BP hopes that we're better for investors.
Ewan Potts at Bloomberg, thank you for joining us. This is the briefing on Monocle Radio. Later this year, Australia will become the first country in the world to ban under-16s from using social media. The introduction of this new law will be closely watched, with a number of countries now considering their own versions of the ban. One such is Singapore, where new guidelines have recently been introduced to limit screen time for children. Adam Hancock is in Singapore and has been taking a look at how countries across Asia are looking to better regulate the use of technology by their youngsters.
This game just appeals to me, maybe because it's about battling and you can choose different types of characters.
Like many children in Singapore, Ian spends a lot of time looking at screens. He's a gaming fanatic and also watches other people playing on YouTube. I asked him just how long he spends watching videos every day.
4 hours?
4 hours?
Is Mum agree?
I don't count.
I think including the weekend, probably 3 hours daily.
Right.
Yeah.
This amount of daily screen time is causing concern for the Singapore government. They recently released stricter guidelines around children's screen use, recommending that youngsters aged between 7 and 12 are limited to 2 hours a day outside of schoolwork. Singapore's health ministry says the situation has reached a critical point, with fears over the impact that excessive screen time is having on children's development and health. I spoke to Ian's mum, Candice Wu.
Your son is 12 at the moment. He's now getting into using the internet and gaming and YouTube.
Are you concerned about that?
Definitely. I think the fear is always with YouTube on what he sees online, and also on gaming, who is speaking to, who is he sharing information with, and things like that.
And what do you do to try and keep an eye on that? Do you monitor what he's doing? Do you speak to him about using the internet safely?
I think it's more about him being able to know what's right or wrong to watch it, and also what are some of the safety measures to have when he's gaming with other people online. And on top of that, he watches YouTube mostly on TV. Right. So where we are in that space as well. So I think this helps in the monitoring of what he watches.
And are you concerned that when Ian gets a little bit older and starts using things like Facebook and Instagram, are you concerned about them as well?
Yes, for sure. I think the main concern would be around cyberbullying as well, and people posing as someone else and things like that. So I also have a 16-year-old son, so we do speak about that.
The eyes of the world are on Australia this morning after Parliament passed sweeping world-first laws overnight, banning children and teenagers from social media.
Whilst other countries grapple with the issue of children and technology, Australia has taken decisive action. Later this year, under-16s will be banned from creating new accounts on popular social media sites like TikTok, Facebook and Instagram. Here's Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
I want to see kids off their devices and onto the footy fields and the swimming pools and the tennis courts. We want them to have real experiences with real people, because we know that social media is causing social harm.
Reception to the ban has been mixed down under, with many asking how it will even work at all. The Australian government has put the onus on social media companies to stop children from creating new accounts, threatening huge fines for those that don't comply. Whilst many questions remain, this new law has certainly attracted attention. Indonesia is exploring the possibility of a similar ban for under-16s, whilst neighbouring Singapore is closely monitoring what happens in Australia as it considers its own restrictions. Here's Mimi Zoe, a law professor from the University of New South Wales.
I think certainly in this region there has been a lot of interest on how Australia will implement this ban. It doesn't have to be completely successful, but if there is some data that suggests, for example, less number of young people on social media, I think that there will be more countries that will follow suit.
Back in Singapore, and whilst Ian was gaming away, I was keen to find out what Candice thought about a possible social media ban in her country.
I think a guideline is a good idea, but I think a full-out ban might not be realistic, because with technology, things are always changing. I don't think you can always ban things in time. Maybe a little bit more monitoring with AI keywords and stuff like that could also play a part in this monitoring for children or under 16. And I think the idea that, they have to have parental consent or age consent for certain app could be a good idea as well.
Elsewhere in Asia, and China has taken its own approach to restricting children's access to the online world. They haven't opted for an Australia-style social media ban, instead focusing their efforts on protecting children from harmful content online. China is also working to curb young people's addiction to online games. For more, I spoke with Haiqing Yu, a professor of media communication at Australia's RMIT University.
So they have the healthy gameplay system that restricts gaming to 1.5 hours on weekdays and 3 hours on weekends for users under age 18. And also there's a nighttime ban that gaming is prohibited for minors between 10 p.m. to 8 a.m.
And I understand they have guidelines for the phone makers and the app stores in terms of a minor's mode, right? Which a parent can turn on and it restricts the amount of usage.
Yes, and apart from those minors mode, platforms like Douyin and with the Chinese version of TikTok enforce age restrictions. This kind of facial recognition or kind of AI-driven technologies that would identify minors based on how they look and also how they move their hands, eyes, etc.
While smartphones continue to intrude on our lives and children get more and more tech-savvy, the debate over young people's access to social media is only going to intensify. Countries across this region are all taking different approaches, but they all have the same message. Something needs to be done. Reporting for Monocle Radio from Singapore, I'm Adam Hancock.
Thank you, Adam. And that is all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Tom Webb, our researcher was Maisie Ringer, and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. The Briefing returns tomorrow at the same time, midday UK. I'm Andrew Muller. Thanks for listening.